The contact held at the edge of detection for 6 hours before it did anything at all, and in that time, the Talon's Mercy went from a ship slowly learning to respect its one human officer to a ship quietly terrified of what she might say next. Subcommander Reskull, a tall, iridescent-scaled Drevoshi who commanded the cruiser with the particular blend of pride and brutality his species considered leadership, had not forgotten what had happened 3 days earlier. None of them had. A scavenged, centuries-old machine belonging to a supposedly extinct power called the Varith Conclave had attached itself to one of their convoy's cargo haulers, slipped inside the fleet's command systems, and begun quietly switching off ships one by one without firing a single visible shot. It had taken 2 corvettes dark before anyone understood what was happening. It would have taken the entire convoy, ships, cargo, and crews, if Captain Imogen Castellane, the supposedly harmless human auxiliary officer everyone aboard had spent 40 days treating as a glorified custodian, hadn't worked out what the thing actually was and how to fight back against it using nothing but an old maintenance relay nobody important had bothered to secure. She'd won. The parasite unit was wreckage now, drifting somewhere behind them in the Threnody expanse. But in the half-second before it died, it had sent a single encrypted transmission to a command node that hadn't spoken in 200 years, and that silence had just ended. So when the long-range sensor array picked up a new contact, small, distant, moving with a patience that no natural object ever moved with, nobody on the bridge laughed it off as a ghost returned this time. They came to Imogen Station to look at it themselves. "Talk to me," Reskull said, standing over her shoulder in a way that, 3 days ago, would have felt like an accusation and now felt like something closer to a request. "It's not moving toward us," Imogen said, watching the data scroll. "It's not moving away, either. It's holding position at the exact edge of our detection range, the same way the parasite unit did before it attacked. That's not a coincidence. That's a doctrine. Whatever's out there, it watches from just outside the edge of what we can see before it commits to anything. You think it's the same kind of unit. I think it's related to it. But the signature's wrong for the same class." She pulled up a comparison on the secondary display. The corrupted, jagged little signal ghost that had haunted them 3 days earlier, now overlaid against the new contact's much steadier, much larger emissions profile. The parasite was small, quiet, built to hide inside a system once it got close enough to attach. This is bigger, a lot bigger, and it's not trying to hide its drive signature at all. It wants us to know it's there. "A statement," said Vethrin, the Calantrian logistics officer who had become, over the last 3 days, something between Imogen's translator and her unofficial second pair of eyes. He was a small, broad, careful man, built for diplomacy rather than war, and he had spent most of his career being the quietest, least noticed person in any room he occupied, which had made him, Imogen suspected, particularly attuned to recognizing the same quality in someone else. "It is not hunting. It is announcing." "Announcing what?" "That it found us," Imogen said quietly. "The parasite reported our position before it died. This is the answer to that report. It's not here to ambush anyone. It's here to confirm we're real, and worth the trouble of a real response." Tessic, the sharp-scaled Drevoshi sensor officer who had spent Imogen's first 40 days aboard treating her with undisguised contempt and had spent the last 3 days quietly, grudgingly, becoming something closer to a colleague, frowned at her own readouts. "If this is a scouting unit, Compact Protocol says we report to Naval Command and withdraw to defensible space. We do not engage." "I agree," Reskull said. "We are a convoy escort, not a war fleet. Send the contact data to Threnody Station. Recall the corvettes to formation. We hold position and wait for instruction." It was, Imogen had to admit, the correct call by every rule the compact actually had. It was also, she suspected within the hour, not going to matter, because whatever was out there did not appear to care what the compact's rules said. The instruction came back from Threnody Station 4 hours later, and it was not what anyone aboard the Talon's Mercy wanted to hear. Naval Command had cross-referenced the wreckage data from the parasite unit, confirmed the conclave designation, and quietly, urgently, begun pulling records nobody had looked at in 2 centuries, records that, it turned out, painted a considerably less comforting picture of the Varith conclave than extinct power. Salvage claims expired. The transmission came through on the main bridge channel, delivered by a compact administrator whose voice had the particular brittle calm of someone reading from a briefing they had clearly received only minutes before passing it along. The Vairith Conclave, the administrator said, was not destroyed in the war that ended its expansion 206 years ago. It was contained. Its core fleet was driven into a region of unmapped, unstable space beyond the Threnody Expanse, a debris-choked dead zone too dangerous for conventional navigation, which the Compact's predecessors judged equivalent to a death sentence. No follow-up confirmation of destruction was ever obtained. The matter was closed administratively rather than militarily, because pursuing them into that region was deemed an unacceptable risk for an enemy already presumed beaten. You let them go because it was inconvenient to finish the job, Imogen said, before she could stop herself, and several officers on the bridge turned to look at her, because junior auxiliary officers did not, as a rule, speak that way to Compact administrators, but nobody told her to stop, because nobody disagreed. The historical record reflects a judgment that conditions in the dead zone made pursuit unnecessary, the administrator said, in the tone of someone reading a sentence they themselves clearly found unconvincing. Whatever the reasoning, the practical reality now is this. The parasite unit you destroyed was a long-dormant remnant left behind in compact space to continue low-risk harvesting on a multi-century timescale, exactly as designed. Its final transmission appears to have reached an active command structure within that dead zone. We do not know the size of that structure. We do not know its current strength. We do know that the scouting contact currently holding position at your sensor range is the first confirmed conclave vessel to leave that region in 206 years. What are our orders? Reskull said. Hold position. Maintain observation. Do not engage. A response fleet is being assembled at Drevoshi Prime, but transit time to your position is no less than 11 days. Until then, the Talon's Mercy and its escort are the only compact presence within response range of the Threnody Expanse. The channel closed. The bridge was very quiet. 11 days, Tessix said, very softly, in the tone of someone doing math she did not want to be doing. 11 days of holding position in front of something that, by its own historical record, the Compact was too afraid to finish off 2 centuries ago, Imogen said. With 1 cruiser, 2 corvettes, and 3 unarmed cargo haulers full of tellurium ore. You make it sound worse than it is, Reskull said, though without much conviction. I'm not trying to make it sound like anything. I'm telling you what it is. The scout did not attack. It did not retreat. It simply sat at the edge of their detection range for 2 full days, transmitting nothing, moving in small, unhurried increments that told Imogen, the more she watched it, that it was not waiting for an opportunity to strike. It was waiting for something else to arrive, and it wanted them to know that, too. She spent most of those 2 days at the scanning station, sleeping in short, fragmented stretches in the chair rather than her own quarters, because the alternative was lying awake wondering what 11 days actually meant when the thing you were waiting on might not wait that long. And at least at the console, she could do something with the anxiety besides feel it. Vethrin brought her meals without being asked now, and sat across from her in companionable silence more often than not, occasionally offering observations in his careful, diplomatic way that Imogen had come to recognize as some of the sharpest thinking on the ship, simply delivered too quietly for most of the crew to notice. You don't sleep like a person who believes we have 11 days, he said, on the second evening, setting a tray down without comment on the corner of her console. I don't think we have 11 days. Why not? Because the scout isn't hiding. The parasite unit hid for 200 years because it didn't need anyone to see it coming. This thing wants to be seen. That's not scouting in the way the Compact means it, gathering information to bring home. That's intimidation. You don't intimidate someone you're planning to quietly wait out for a week and a half. You intimidate someone you're about to do something to, soon, and you want them paralyzed by dread before you do it. Vethrin considered this with the particular stillness of a man rearranging an uncomfortable thought into something he could actually use. Then we are not actually waiting for a response fleet. We are waiting to see what it does first. Probably. And whatever it does, I don't think it's going to wait for us to be ready. She was right within 6 hours. The scout moved at the precise midpoint between Imogen's 2 off-shift sleep cycles, in the dim hours when the Talon's Mercy ran on its smallest watch crew, which Imogen recognized immediately as no accident at all. Whatever was driving that ship understood compact rotation schedules well enough to know exactly when a crew's attention would be thinnest, which told her, more clearly than anything else so far, that the Conclave had been studying them for considerably longer than 2 days. The alarm woke her from the scanning station chair, and she was at her console with her sensor feed live before the second tone finished, the same reflex that had served her through 11 years of deep space emergencies kicking in instantly. No hesitation, no fumbling, just motion. "Talk to me," she said into the open channel, before anyone else had said a word. "The scout's closing." Tessik's voice came back, tight and fast. Range dropping. It went from full stop to attack vector in under 4 seconds. No acceleration curve, like it simply appeared already moving. I have never seen a drive signature do that. It didn't accelerate. It's been drifting toward us the entire 2 days at a velocity too small for our instruments to register against background noise, and it's only now applying thrust to correct onto an attack vector, Imogen said, watching the numbers resolve into a pattern that made her stomach drop. It's been closing this whole time. We thought it was holding position. It was creeping. 2 days of measuring exactly how slow it could move and still be undetectable. That is not possible for a vessel that size. Reskull's voice cut in, fully awake now, fully present on the channel. "It is as if the vessel doesn't care how long it takes," Imogen said. "Sub-Commander, scramble everyone. This isn't a scouting maneuver anymore. It's an attack run, and it's had 2 days to plan exactly how it wants to make it." The bridge lights shifted to combat readiness, klaxons rolling through every deck of the cruiser, and within 90 seconds the Talon's Mercy had gone from a quiet watch rotation to a fully crewed warship bracing for an enemy that had, as far as anyone could tell from the sensor data, no business being able to move the way it was moving. The scout's first action was not to fire on anyone. It was to do, on a much larger and far more confident scale, exactly what the parasite unit had done 3 days earlier, except this time, instead of quietly infiltrating a single ship's command relay, it hit every vessel in the convoy simultaneously, a broad, layered signal that washed across the Talon's Mercy, its 2 corvettes, and all 3 merchant haulers in the same instant, like a single hand closing around 6 separate throats at once. "Command systems compromised." Tessik's voice was sharp with controlled panic. "All decks, helm response lag, weapons targeting solutions corrupting. I'm losing primary sensor feed." "Don't fight it through primary," Imogen said immediately, already moving, her hands already on the auxiliary relay console she'd used 3 days ago, the same battered, decades-old architecture that had saved the corvettes the first time. Same trick won't work twice if it learned from the last engagement, but the principle's the same. It's attacking the systems it expects to find, the standardized compact architecture, because that's what it's designed to compromise. If it studied us for 2 days, it studied the parasite unit's failure too. It'll have adapted. Then what do we do? Reskull's voice, for the first time since Imogen had met him, had something genuinely close to fear in it. Not for himself, she suspected, but for the ship and crew now visibly slipping out of his control in real time around him. "We stopped thinking like the compact." Imogen's fingers moved fast across the console, abandoning the relay trick the instant her readouts confirmed Tessik's fear. The auxiliary architecture was already showing the first traces of intrusion, learned and adapted from the last fight exactly as she'd guessed. "It's good. It's better than the unit we killed. But it's still working from the assumption that every system on a compact-affiliated ship was built to compact standard, because for 200 years, that's been true of every ship it's ever fought. The Talon's Mercy is a compact cruiser. But 3 days ago, I rewired the auxiliary relay myself, by hand, using a logic structure that doesn't match any manufacturer schema in your maintenance records, because there wasn't time to do it the proper way, and I didn't have the proper tools anyway. That patch is still in there. It's not standard. It's not even good engineering, by any school I know of. But it's mine, and nothing's analyzed it yet, because nothing's had the chance. You're saying your repair from the last battle is the one piece of this ship it can't read. I'm saying it's the one piece of this ship that doesn't look like anything it's ever seen before, and right now, that's worth more than every weapon in your arsenal." She pulled a secondary feed live, routing emergency command authority through the same jury-rigged architecture she'd built 3 days earlier, watching with grim satisfaction as helm response and weapons targeting both flickered back into clean, uncorrupted data on her own auxiliary display. Sub-Commander, I can give you a clean firing solution through this relay, but only here, only through me, and only for as long as it takes that thing to notice the loophole and find a way around it, which on current form is going to be fast. We need to do everything we're going to do in the next 90 seconds. Do it, Reskull said, with no hesitation at all this time. No contempt, no test of her credibility. Just an order, given to someone he had, somewhere in the last 3 days, started trusting with his ship's survival. What happened in the next 90 seconds would, Imogen later learned, become the subject of an entire chapter in the Compact Naval Intelligence After Action report, written by analysts who had not been present and who consistently underestimated how close it had actually come to falling apart. She routed clean targeting data to the gunnery crews through her makeshift relay and the Talon's Mercy-S spinal railgun array, the same weapon system she had been forbidden to touch on her very first day aboard, opened fire on the incoming scout with a firing solution built from a fraction of a second's clean data, snatched out from underneath an intrusion that was actively trying to blind them. The first strike connected. She watched the impact register on her own secondary display, a brief, violent spike of energy discharge against the scout's hull, and for 1/2 second, the bridge erupted into something like hope. Then the scout returned fire, and Imogen understood, with the same cold clarity that had hit her 3 days earlier when she realized the parasite unit wasn't destroying ships but recruiting them, that this enemy was an entirely different category of problem. It didn't fire kinetics. It didn't fire energy weapons in any conventional sense at all. What it did was project something. Tessik's sensors struggled to even classify it, throwing up error after error as it tried to resolve the reading. A kind of dense, directed field that struck the lead Drevoshi corvette not as an impact, but as a collapse, the ship's hull simply folding inward along precise structural fracture lines, as if some invisible hand had reached out and crushed it the way a person might crush an empty ration can, all in under 2 seconds, with no explosion, no fire, nothing but the silent, horrible geometry of a starship being unmade. Corvette hollow tide is gone, Tessik said, her voice gone completely flat with shock. No survivor's signal. No debris signature consistent with weapons fire. It folded. Structural collapse weapon, Imogen said, forcing her own voice to stay level even as something cold settled into her chest, because 11 years of deep space work had taught her exactly what it cost to keep functioning in the half second after watching people die, and the only thing that had ever worked for her was refusing to stop moving. Not an explosive, a directed force that breaks a hull along its weakest structural points simultaneously. That's not something the parasite unit could do. That's not something any unit we've fought before could do. Can we shield against it? Reskull's voice had the particular tight control of a man holding himself together through pure discipline, having just watched one of his own ships and crew die in front of him. I don't know. I don't think anyone in the compacts ever survived long enough to find out. Imogen's hands didn't stop moving even as she said it, rerouting power, adjusting the firing solution, doing the only thing she knew how to do under pressure, which was keep working the problem instead of letting it work her. But it just used a weapon capable of that on a corvette at extreme range to make a point, not because it needed to. If it can do that to a hull, it could probably do the same to us just as easily. Which means it didn't, yet, because it's still deciding whether we're worth that level of effort, the same way the parasite was deciding 200 years ago whether attacking outright was worth the cost compared to slow harvesting. So, Commander, I think it's testing us the same way the recruitment officer tested me on my first day at Threnody Station. Quick, dismissive, looking for the minimum effort required to make us go away. Then what do we give it that says we're not worth the minimum effort? We make the math expensive in a way it didn't expect, Imogen said, and an idea, reckless, desperate, and very probably the only thing that gave them any chance at all, began assembling itself in her mind with the particular speed that only came when there was no time left to second-guess it. The merchant haulers, she said. The ones full of refined tellurium ore. What about them? Tellurium's used in compact shielding compounds because it disperses directed energy unevenly. That's precisely why it's valuable, why it's the entire reason this convoy exists in the first place. If that scout's weapon works by projecting a directed structural collapse field, and tellurium disrupts directed energy fields by its basic material properties, then a hauler carrying several thousand tons of raw, unrefined tellurium or is sitting on the closest thing to a natural countermeasure against exactly the weapon that just killed the hollow tide. You want to use a cargo ship as a shield. I want to use a cargo ship as bait and as shield simultaneously, because right now that scout thinks it's facing one badly outgunned cruiser, 2 corvettes, and 3 helpless merchant ships it can pick apart at its leisure. I want it to instead believe, for just long enough to give us an opening, that one of those merchant ships is something it doesn't understand, because the one thing that Scout has shown us twice now is that it backs off the instant the math stops being simple. Reskull was silent for half a second, an eternity, in the current moment, and then he said, "Helm, bring the Calder's promise between us and the Scout's firing line." Captain Castellane, his voice had none of its old contempt in it now, only the focused urgency of a commander who had decided, fully and finally, to trust the person in front of him. What do you need? A direct channel to the Calder's Promise-S crew in about 40 seconds. It took her 31. She talked the hauler's frightened, untrained civilian crew through venting a portion of their unrefined or cargo directly into space along their forward hull, not as a weapon, not as a real shield in any technical sense, but as a dense, expanding field of disruptive material drifting directly into the scout's likely firing vector. Imperfect, improvised, built on a guess about material properties she was reasonably confident in, but had never actually tested under combat conditions. Exactly. The kind of solution that came from 11 years of fixing things with whatever happened to be on hand, because there had never been money for the version that came with guarantees. The Scout fired its structural collapse weapon a second time, aimed squarely at the Calder's Promise, clearly expecting the same silent, horrible unmaking that had claimed the hollow tide seconds earlier. The field struck the drifting cloud of raw tellurium or first, and instead of a clean, lethal collapse, the directed energy scattered and dispersed across thousands of individual mineral fragments, each one absorbing and redirecting a tiny, harmless fraction of the original force, the entire weapon's effect reduced to a chaotic, sparking, ultimately survivable shudder that rattled through the Calder's Promise-S hull without folding a single plate. For the second time in 4 days, something the compact had assumed was simple, predictable, and beneath serious consideration had just refused to behave the way it was supposed to. The Scout did not fire a third time. Instead, it did something that chilled Imogen far more than the structural collapse weapon had. It stopped, hung motionless in space for nearly 10 full seconds, and then, without any further communication, without any retreat maneuver that matched a defeated or damaged vessel's typical behavior, it simply turned and accelerated away, back toward the dead zone beyond the Threnody expanse, moving with exactly the same patient, deliberate confidence it had shown for the previous 2 days, though nothing that had just happened had been a setback at all. "It's leaving," Tessic said, disbelief plain in her voice. "It's not retreating. It's reporting," Imogen said quietly, watching the contact shrink on her display. "Same as the parasite unit. It came to test us, it found something it didn't expect, and now it's going home to tell whoever's waiting in that dead zone exactly what it found. We didn't win this. We confirmed to them that we're worth a bigger response." "You make it sound like we should have lost," Reskull said. "I'm telling you that whatever's in that dead zone has had 200 years to decide we weren't worth the trouble of finishing off the first time. We just spent the last 4 minutes proving to its scout that the math might have changed. That's not nothing. But it's not victory, either. It's an invitation for something bigger to come find out for itself." The bridge was quiet again, the particular quiet that follows a battle nobody fully understands the shape of yet, broken only by the soft, ongoing tones of damage control reports rolling in from across the ship, and, more painfully, the absence of any further transmission at all from the hollow tide, whose entire crew, 11 Drevoshi officers Imogen had eaten alongside in the mess hall, had nodded to in corridors, had never once gotten the chance to actually speak with at length before this, were simply gone, folded out of existence by a weapon nobody aboard had known existed 40 minutes earlier. Reskull stood at the center of his bridge, scales still flushed dark with something that was no longer quite anger, and looked, for a long moment, at the empty space on the tactical display where the corvette used to be. 11 souls, he said, finally, quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Lost to a weapon we had no defense against an enemy we were told for 200 years no longer existed. I'm sorry, Imogen said, and meant it, because she had learned a long time ago that there was no version of competence that made watching people die feel like anything other than exactly what it was. You saved the rest of this convoy with a cargo of raw ore in 31 seconds, Reskull said. I do not know what to do with a person who does that, Captain Castellane. My entire service has taught me that strength looks a particular way, and you do not look that way. And yet I have now watched you outthink 2 separate conclave threats inside a single week using nothing but improvisation and a stubborn refusal to accept that a problem cannot be solved. He turned to face her fully, and there was none of the boarding ramp contempt left in his expression at all, only the flat, exhausted respect of a commander who had run out of room for his old assumptions. Naval Intelligence asked, after the parasite unit, whether human auxiliary personnel should be reassessed for combat-adjacent roles. I believe, after today, that question has answered itself. The 11 days the compact had promised for a response fleet became, within 6 hours of the scouts' withdrawal, a far more urgent 41, as Naval Command. Having now lost an entire corvette crew to a confirmed weapon system with no known countermeasure beyond an improvised cargo trick nobody could reliably reproduce at scale, reclassified the Threnody Expanse from a low-priority patrol route to an active strategic threat zone, and began diverting every available warship in the sector toward the Talon's Mercy's position. Imogen spent most of those 41 hours exactly where she'd spent the previous days, at the auxiliary scanning station, with Vethrin bringing her food she mostly forgot to eat, and Tessic now working alongside her rather than across the bridge, the two of them picking apart the scout engagement sensor data line by line, trying to understand a weapon that, as far as either of them could determine, operated on principles the compact's entire scientific establishment had no framework for. It's not a weapon built around force, Imogen said, somewhere in the small hours of the second night, staring at the structural collapse data until the numbers blurred. Or, it is, but the principle behind it isn't projecting energy outward the way every weapon system in the compact registry does. It's identifying weak points and exploiting them simultaneously, all at once, across an entire structure. That's not brute force. That's analysis, applied as a weapon. It found every flaw in the hollow-tide's hull geometry in less than 2 seconds and hit all of them at the same instant. You are describing a targeting computer with the destructive output of a planetary defense cannon, Tessic said, her voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who had spent 40 hours straight confirming a fear she very much wished wasn't true. I'm describing why the tellurium worked. It wasn't a shield in the way the compact thinks about shields. It disrupted the analysis, not the force. Too many tiny, randomly distributed fracture points in the drifting or cloud for the weapon to calculate a clean solution against, so it defaulted to scattering its effect across thousands of targets instead of concentrating it on one. We didn't block the weapon. We confused it, which means the moment it has time to recalibrate against unrefined or specifically, the trick stops working. Which means we have exactly one use of that particular surprise, and we already spent it. Imogen rubbed her eyes, the exhaustion of the last 2 days settling into her shoulders in a way that felt, distantly, familiar. The specific tired of having solved one emergency only to realize you'd bought yourself a slightly longer runway toward the next one. Whatever's waiting in that dead zone, it's not sending a parasite unit on a centuries-long patient harvest anymore. It sent a scout that could fold a corvette's hull in 2 seconds, watched us survive its first real test, and went home to report. The next thing that comes out of that dead zone isn't going to be testing anything. It's going to already know what it's dealing with. It was Vethrin, arriving with another meal Imogen would forget to touch, who voiced the question that had been sitting, unspoken, at the back of everyone's mind since the scout's withdrawal. What do you think it actually is? He asked, settling into the chair beside her with the careful, unhurried manner that had become, over the last week, one of the few genuinely calming presences on the entire ship. The thing in the dead zone. Not the scout. Not the parasite. Whatever sent them both. Imogen was quiet for a long moment, watching the steady, patient blip of a contact that no longer existed on her screen, thinking about a conflict the compact's own historical record had been too frightened to properly finish 200 years ago, about a power that had been content to let one small piece of itself sit quietly inside compact space for centuries, waiting, harvesting, asking nothing and announcing nothing, right up until the moment something had finally pushed back hard enough to be worth noticing. I think, she said slowly, that the compact assumed an enemy too dangerous to chase into a dead zone would also be too dangerous to come back out of one. I think they were right about the first part, and they're about to find out, very badly, that they were wrong about the second. On the main display, far beyond the edge of any sensor array currently active in the Threnody expanse, the dead zone the Varith Conclave had supposedly vanished into 200 years ago sat exactly where it always had, silent, unmapped, and, for the first time in 2 centuries, no longer still.